Now, I don't know all of you, although some of you I might know. I do know a little bit about who you are. I know your passion, I know your commitment, and I know how much you wish this was a normal year. However, like a true kindergarten or first grade teacher, I also know that you have some eternal optimism. You also have a slightly obsessive tendency to turn everyday routines into a song, and you don't mind getting covered in goldfish crackers, paint, you know, pretty much anything. I just want you to know that I'm so glad you're here. I want you to know that you're in exactly the right place at the right time and that you belong. Today is an opportunity and an invitation for us to join as bilingual educators who care deeply about the children and families that we serve. We believe in our programs and we believe in the power of bilingualism. I know that you've either just finished your first day today or maybe within the last week, or you're imminently about to begin. Your time is so valuable and important to us for that reason. But you deserve time also to slow down and to reflect and to connect. And that spirit, let's just take a moment to center ourselves, relax our bodies, release some tension. Good. Put your feet on the floor, roll your shoulders back, close any tabs you don't need, give you permission to shut off that work email. Sorry if there's any superintendents out there. Admittedly, of course, we've got a really full session for you, but no, we bring these resources and strategies to you in this context, right? With how much you're doing and what's happening in the world around us. And we really hope that you walk away with concrete strategies and resources and tools. And at the end of the session, we'll give you opportunity to use the chat to give us a little bit of feedback. We always want to incorporate your suggestions. And one of our protocols today, since we do have quite a few people joining us, which is wonderful, is that we're all on mute, but we do want to hear from you. And so we're going to use the chat feature. If you haven't used this before, you can find that little gray bubble in the center that says chat and click on that. We'll be asking you a few process questions to use in the chat. What you'll see come up then is that type message here box. And that's an area where you can enter your comments or responses. And if the comments are flying up faster than you can keep up with, a handy little trick is to go ahead and click inside that box. It'll pause the flow, and then you can scroll through and read at your leisure. So in that vein, let's give it a try. I know as a K-1 teacher, you already have expertise around establishing relationships with your families. And in the spring, when COVID shuttered all of our buildings and we had to pivot in a moment collectively, I think it was Friday, March 13th for us, you brought those relationships that were already established with you. But gone were the ways that we connect with families at the classroom pickup or drop off. Maybe sometimes we even pinned little notes to those kindergartners' shirts or tucked it in their backpack to send it home. Or maybe you did what I used to do, which was kind of just stalk around the parking lot, waiting until we found the right moment. You had to figure out right away and quickly how you can maintain those relationships and how you could keep them going. So please join us in this virtual conversation in the chat box and share one way that you connected successfully with English learner families last spring. So go ahead and do that now. We'll wait just a little bit. So I'm seeing from a lot of folks that it was phone calls home, and you were doing that probably from your cell phones, from your home phones. We texted, we called, right? We used social media. We drove by houses. You made videos and Flipgrids. I might have made a few myself. We dug into those contacts of the folks that we already knew and leveraged who knew who could connect with who and help us make sure that everybody was doing okay. And some of those practices worked because we had already strong relationships. And we know that this fall, though, we're going to need to find some new and efficient and effective ways to connect, ways that will allow us to drop that distance in distance learning, and ways that will also allow us to maximize our pre-existing knowledge and help us quickly and effectively build and then sustain that connection. So as we head into the task of partnering with our families who are new to school and probably also new to dual immersion, we can look at these foundational beliefs that you see up on your screen that are based in research around family partnerships and bilingual identity development and also language ideology. And no surprise, they're also aligned and rooted in the EL roadmap, principle number 1, assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, which specifically calls for schools to value and build strong family-school partnerships. Principle number 1, of course, also reminds us that the language and cultures of English learners and their families, what they bring to education, is an asset for learning. So I know that as bilingual educators, you join me in believing in the process and the purpose of dual immersion, the pedagogy, the 3 pillars. We've seen and experienced the powerfulness of our model and the tremendous growth that students can make. However, distance learning has forced us on a dime to adapt our strategies. There's social isolation, economic crisis, racial injustice, and generalized anxiety that has disproportionately affected our historically marginalized families, particularly immigrant and English learner. This crisis has amplified our fears, and it's poised to regress some of our progress. Some districts have or are considering pausing the growth of dual immersion programs, and some families have or are considering pulling their children out of dual immersion. I've had calls and emails, I'm sure you have too, with really stressed voices asking me if they should stop. But I would argue that in this crisis, we need dual language now more than ever. It's even that much more critical. We need it to build cross-cultural connections. We need it as a tool to affirm those intersectional identities, and we need it as a way to combat and address system inequities. We all know that we're going to need to be flexible, and we need to give ourselves and our families grace, but that we have to keep going. These foundational beliefs around partnering with families that you see up on the screen in the first month of school, they're what we believe and what we want families to feel and to know in the context of this crisis. Let's focus in on the first one, that families bring assets and resources to our schools and classrooms. Even in distance, we can acknowledge, affirm, and leverage these assets so that we as educators grow, we examine our own biases, and so that students can see themselves and others in the content and in the practices of the classroom. And when they can see themselves and see others, they feel valued and validated. And once their intersectional identities are seen and heard, then we can move into social justice teaching and to take action around inequity. So we commit as bilingual educators to seeing these family assets as just that, assets. We use a strength-based lens, one that doesn't assume that what is approved by the dominant culture is the only way to be. We know that structural racism posits whiteness as normal and asset-driven, but we challenge that. We challenge the meritocracy of the notion that posits communities of color, especially families of students classified as English learners, as deficit-based, and instead we're going to elevate and we're going to recognize that communities of color bring a multitude of cultural wealth. And in addition, families have funds of knowledge. Those are those unique assets within a family unit that we can also leverage for distance and classroom learning to build concepts and skills. I'd like to go just a little bit deeper into this idea of community cultural wealth. So the idea comes from researcher Tara Yoso and is based in critical race theory. She proposes that there's 6 main categories of capital that draw from the knowledges communities of color bring from the home into the classroom. And I would highlight 3 of those 6 that are particularly relevant to this discussion. The first one we as bilingual educators are tremendously familiar with, and that is linguistic capital, which reflects the ideas that students of color arrive at school already with multiple language and communication skills, and no one knows this better than us. The second area is familial capital, which refers to those cultural knowledges nurtured among Familia, kin, right, that carry a sense of community history, memory, and cultural intuition. And the third area that's particularly relevant today is social capital, which can be understood as the networks of people and community resources. These peer and other social contexts provide both like instrumental, tangible, and emotional support to navigate through society's institutions. So if you're a little bit of a research nerd like me and you want to know more, we're going to have a link to Tara Yoso's seminal work in the resources at the end of the seminar. So part of the call to action in Principle 1 of the EL roadmap is to create these inclusive and affirming environments. And if we backwards map and unpack that idea of inclusive and affirming environment, we can begin at connection and belonging. Belonging and connection is that I see you, we're in relationship with one another, and we belong together in this community. It's the first and most important message in a strong relationship where families feel included and affirmed. For example, we say, not my class, but our class, our school, our learning. And that kind of discourse really matters, the we and the ours. Families and children need to know what school, what class, what community, and what movement, hopefully, they belong to. Next, we have to attend to their emotional process and our emotional process and position. We must acknowledge it and validate it. How did it feel when I was going over the agenda? Remember how I said that you were in the right place at the right time and that you belonged here? I tried to genuinely acknowledge how hard you're working, the stress, the effort, the conditions that we're in right now. I hope that it made you feel welcome. Our words matter in a crisis like the one that we're in right now, and we can be concrete and explicit and direct with our messages of belonging and care. We recognize also that families want to connect with each other. They want friends. They want someone to commiserate with and also to celebrate with. Even just one other family friend will help them feel welcome and like they belong. Building relationships takes time and practice and skill. It doesn't just happen overnight. You know that. You've been establishing classroom communities for years. But some things we can do, like a check-in, can give us time and a process and a routine around building relationship. It's also predictable and regular, and it helps us feel safe and happy too. So in the end, when we can do these things, we're going to build trust between ourselves and the families themselves. When we attend to their emotional state, when we help everyone feel like they belong, when we develop regular routines and cross relationships from family to family, and if we can do all this and families can trust us, then when or if harm occurs, and we all know that things can happen in the course of a school year, we can lean into that trust we've established in order to repair the relationship and move forward. The time you spend now is going to pay off in dividends later. And the last area I want to emphasize is this one of families needing validation and encouragement to embrace the bilingual journey. You know that joining a new group is hard. That's why you're purposeful with your classroom activities. It's hard for families too. And they're going to need to take risks in order to develop two languages, and they're going to be uncomfortable at times. In addition to that, of course, we know that we face, all of us together, a linguistic and a racist society, and that those systems overwhelmingly message that English only is the way to learn. Linguicism is discrimination and oppression based on language, something that many of our English learner families know all too well. So those, in turn, can lead to facing our own self-doubt and family's doubt. Am I making a good choice for my child when there's lots of messages telling me perhaps otherwise? So in the EL Roadmap Principle number 1, we talk about culturally sustaining practices and curricula to help us affirm and include families of English learners. Celebrating the bilingual journey by purposely incorporating time and practices to do so is one way to sustain bilingualism as a cultural identity. And validation and encouragement in the first few weeks, especially, that kind of encourages their effort and their tries towards bilingualism will help solidify their commitment to the program and help everyone discover the larger bilingual and powerful bilingual community. So all of us in education have been wondering and worrying even more than this summer about how, even probably since we've been in distance learning, about how we were going to onboard families this fall because we didn't have the relationships that we had the rest of the year. And although we've had that trial run in the spring, you know, most of us, if you were like me, we were more concerned with academic slide, right? Maintaining what we had already done, making sure that families had adequate resources and the things that they need to survive this quick shift. And also we were adjusting ourselves from the shock of the abrupt closure and the loss that we felt. And this fall is different. Although we still don't totally know exactly how long it will last, we do know that we have to make bigger learning gains. And I know because I talk to educators all the time, they feel an imperative, a collective imperative, to keep that chasm from widening further. We have to welcome families kind of like an onboarding to school, both generally and specifically to dual immersion in kindergarten and first grade. We need these newest little members of our community to feel welcome, to feel excited and supported as they take what we know to be a powerful journey towards bilingualism. The question remains though, how do we turn those foundational beliefs into actions that are going to support teachers and families during distance learning? So we have these 4 actions to consider and explore for today's webinar. Build strong family relationships, celebrate and connect bilingual counter stories, create dual language advocates, and develop families as learning partners. These actions are designed from our foundational beliefs and research for how to support families during distance learning and align to the EL Roadmap principles. First, we're going to discuss those strong family relationships by looking closely at the strategies designed to give structure and process for deepening both family to teacher and family to family relationships. We're going to introduce two strategies for you, family cohorts and family interviews. Second, we're going to celebrate and connect families and ourselves in the process to the why of joining dual language. We can create belonging and connection via storytelling, exploring our shared commitment to bilingualism and our bilingual identities con nuestros testimonios. We'll show you purposeful, thoughtful activities to help families connect to their emergent bilingual story so that they can in turn celebrate and encourage their children. Next, we'll also take a look at how to build their program understanding so that they can become advocates and leaders, champions really, for dual immersion. And finally, we're going to take a look at ways to develop families and caregivers as partners in learning. Think co-teacher via structures and routines. It could be a family member or a sibling or a child care provider or someone else that's with their students helping them engage in their lessons, because chances are these 5- and 6-year-olds are not alone. So how will we include and support these partners in learning? All right, well, I'd like to take a poll in a minute. This is here to help me understand a little bit more about where you're at. So we're navigating this uncharted territory together of distance learning and relationship building. And this poll is going to help me collect information around which action item you think might be the most challenging to implement in distance learning. In just a minute, you're going to be able to choose from the 4 action areas. And while the poll is tabulating, if you have time, you can answer that question. What else do your families need in this first month of distance learning in the chat box? So let's go ahead and start this poll. I see it up on the screen. Which action do you think might be the most challenging to implement during distance learning? Building strong, meaningful relationships, authentically celebrating and encouraging families' emergent bilingual identity, creating dual language advocates within our family community, developing families as partners in learning, co-teachers. And I see that the results are still coming in. Just over 60% have voted. Thank you so much. And if you finish while we're still tabulating, please feel free to type that answer to the question in the chat. All right, well, let's go ahead and end that poll. All right, it looks like many of us are wondering about building strong, meaningful relationships during distance learning and also developing families as partners in learning. The good news is that we're going to have some really hearty sections in those 2 areas, in all the areas. And so when we get there, as questions come up, please feel free to put them in the chat. I also am going to take a look at the chat here and see some of the other. Relationship building is hard. Thank goodness I looped with my class. Oh, that's nice. Great. Thanks for answering in the chat. There's some things that families might need. Support with technology, strong relationships, and tech needs. That's right. So let's just get going then and dive into that first area. So let's begin at the beginning with those strong relationships. Our first offerings and strategies and structures will help us develop meaningful and strong family relationships. Assets and need responsive schools, of course, value and build these relationships. And there's some things that we already know about relationship building in distance learning because, again, of that trial run we had last spring. Let's just pause here though for a moment and remember. We're going to learn a ton in a very short order here. We're going to look back in 6 months from now and recognize that some of these practices worked and some were less effective. The one thing I know is that we're in this together and nobody has a perfect plan. There's no expert in this. We're up here offering some strategies and solutions, but we're going to really come together, and that's how we're going to make this work with our best ideas and effort forward. In some ways, it's kind of like our first year of teaching all over again. However, there's a few things that we know, right? So we know that we're going to need to be creative. We know that teacher to family and family to family relationships matter. We know the things we did before won't necessarily work here, but might. And we know that communication will need to be frequent, two-way, and will mean that we have to adapt to feedback. And above all, nothing has been predictable in this pandemic or consistent, except that things are always changing rapidly. And K-1 families are on the steep end of school as a system learning curve. We have so much lingo, so much ritual tradition. K-12 is new to them, and typically so is dual immersion. So we know that families are going to need to know us, but that they also need to know each other, especially early on, and especially if they are minoritized by enrollment or system structure, as frequently can happen to English learners in some programs. So let's introduce our first strategy. Think back to that not so distant past when you were on campus. What did you see? Groups of families huddling, chatting. I saw some of it in the chat, at pickup in the parking lot, drop off at the bus. They form small groups. Chisme, nods of approval, intercambio. Think for a moment with me now also. How did these impromptu groups help you? How did you identify and leverage the natural leaders to quickly and effectively share information, to get your Kleenex restocked, or to make sure you had tamales at the next fundraiser? It's in this vein, in this intercambio, that we developed our first strategy offer, and that's the idea of family cohorts. Family cohorts are a way for you to make space and time to not only allow you to connect with families, but to foster that natural and critical family-to-family connection. Now, I'm not talking about pods. This is something we've seen forming lately around class and race, and it's not what we're talking about. This is a family-to-family connection and teacher-to-family connection. Cohorts are more like a co-opting, a purposeful grouping, a way to leverage that desire that families have to share in the struggle and in the success, and a way for us to build allies and supports and liaisons in dual immersion and bilingualism. A cohort is a purposeful grouping of families who meet once a week with an organized and thoughtful, very brief agenda. And cohorts for you can, one, maximize your meeting time and minimize repeating important need-to-know information. They can help you tap into family leaders, finding those who might serve as language liaisons, and they can develop advocates who will support the teacher, the class, and the model. It'll also be a place where, most importantly, we can elevate voice and counter stories, where we can center the needs of English learners and center the assets of English learners. In the next few slides, we're going to talk about how to get started, how to build the groups, and how to lead the meetings with a gradual release towards family ownership. So to get started, I want to let you know first that these resources will be shared with you after the webinar, so you're going to have access to all of them, and we're going to go through plenty of samples. In that folder, you're going to see the full strategy write-up, which you can read, and there are also sample agendas, and for a few weeks, one that's fully built out for you to start with, and others that give you ideas and prompts. There's also a sample survey for you to consider using to build your own, and family cohorts lend themselves nicely to build intercambios that also give you a direction in terms of where to start with those family interviews, which is the second strategy we're going to talk about shortly. But to get your family cohort going, you're going to need to gather some basic information via a survey. So let's spend a moment just talking about surveys. Surveys by no means replace or suffice for in-person two-way communication. They're just a tool to help us organize and prioritize our limited time and to help you determine where to start your in-person communication. This one includes basic prompts like the one on the screen to help you determine preferred language, meeting times, if they have a sibling in upper grades. We're going to use this survey to tell us much more than the answers to the questions that are in it. So within the first 48 hours, you're going to know who has or has not accessed the survey. And this alone is valuable information. And we'll tell you where to start your welcoming and your connecting. You know, gone are the days where we could start in alpha order or one end of the alphabet or the other and just get going and use stamina and determination to get to the other end, or where we just said we're going to do 2 families each week. We don't have really that kind of time. So in an effort to prioritize and center English learners, our suggestion, if you choose to use this strategy, is to start reaching out to English learner families who didn't access the survey first. And then you know what to do. You're going to call, text, email, whatever it takes. Introduce yourself, get to know them, ask some of those survey questions. Then you can go back and check in with English learner families who did access the survey. Connect and schedule them first, just check in about technology to build your master cohort schedule. Then you're gonna go back and start with those who fall into other priority areas who didn't access the survey. And back and forth like that until you have really built from centering the needs of English learners forward your connection with families and some of the services you're gonna provide. So you're gonna use this information that you find in the survey to organize your groups. Maybe you're gonna be able to stack one family member per group who has an older sibling in dual language. And that kind of reassurance to other parents can really be very helpful. Finally, let's just think for a minute carefully about if the groups will be language alike or bilingual. You know, there are considerations, of course, for both ways. What we want to avoid is language alike groups that last the entire semester and keeps families isolated. At the beginning, though, as you're developing affirming space, it's important to protect and honor English learner family voices. And this is a reason to consider language alike groups in the first few meetings. You've probably experienced when in bilingual groups that how we need to be careful that we don't allow English to dominate. Everything should be interpreted using Spanish as the primary language. And interpretation is a skill. And I was in plenty of IEP meetings over this last spring to tell you that it can be very challenging over Zoom, but it can be done. And just having materials printed in one language and speaking in another doesn't necessarily suffice. And sometimes we take the role of reminding our colleagues to slow down and to allow for interpretation. And your efforts in that way are really valued. So once you determine your purposeful grouping and flexible scheduling, consider what you might need from your administrator. Some districts are giving teachers additional time or they're flexing instruction just in those first 2 weeks so that you can engage in these types of meetings and interviews. If you're not sure, ask about it. Maybe the idea of me suggesting that you do 3 cohort meetings a week the first 2 weeks is a little bit overwhelming, and I could understand that. Maybe you want to consider starting just with English learner families in a couple cohort groups and then reshuffle, making the groups bilingual. The goal in the end is bilingual, independent groups of families that have developed a supportive network and a social connection. So whatever organization you choose for your cohort meetings, the proposed structure, the agenda is the same. Cohort meetings are meant to be brief, no more than 30 minutes. You can see the 4 agenda items up on your screen. And it just happens that those agenda items match with our actions. They should look familiar. You can also see in the image a sample agenda. I want to draw your attention to that little light bulb that's going to keep coming up back in other areas. The first thing you're always going to do is a check-in, and that's similar to what you do in a morning meeting. It's really purposeful, and it's an opportunity for families to learn about each other and to develop connections. The check-in questions should be thoughtful and purposeful, neither too deep or potentially unsafe, but also not completely random like your favorite ice cream. I mean, not that ice cream isn't important. Ice cream is very important, especially in the last few months it became in my household. But you know, like questions that are centered around the knowing and the connecting of families to their children's learning. In today's webinar, we're going to go deeply into each one of those sections of the agenda and why it might be important to consider trying it out, how you can leverage it. We're going to start with the bilingual identity activities, move into the dual language advocates, and finish up with developing partners in learning, that co-teacher. So up on the screen right now is a section of the strategy write-up. And now that I've shared the idea with you a little bit, we're going to take some time to read through this part of the strategy write-up. And I'd like you to jot down some words or ideas that resonate with you in the chat and share them there. And then we will move to the next. So let's take a moment and go ahead and give this a read. All right, thank you. I'm noticing promote understanding of bilingual development, celebrating our bilingual identity, celebrating, validating, building community, ownership, leveraged uniquely, reality of marginalization and the need to support and counter this, nurture and sustain. And there's many other comments that are going up a little too quickly for me to keep up with and present. All right, thank you so much for your comments. So let's look at the family interviews strategy next. This one goes really nicely with the family cohort model, but they don't necessarily have to work. You don't have to do one and then the other. This strategy, the family interviews, is also aimed at strengthening relationships and showing and deepening connections. And it's a research-based strategy as well. The goal about the family interview is to learn about those funds of knowledge, those unique funds of knowledge that I mentioned earlier at the start of the webinar, that a family brings to the family school partnership. And to learn about these funds and to really deeply know them, we have to dedicate time and make space. And while that survey is going to help us organize our groups and get things going with basic information, it's only one way. So surveys have to be connected to other regular and deep communication opportunities, and this is an offer of another one. I know that I can share several stories, as I'm sure you can too. In fact, you posted about them in the chat about what you were doing last spring, how after one long phone call between a teacher and a family member, participation in distance learning dramatically increased. It's those personal connections and relationships. So family interviews are an asset-based approach to focus on that kind of two-way conversation that gives you prompts with questions to ask. In the beginning, it might be a little bit uncomfortable asking some of the questions because they might seem intrusive. But what we know is that in order to really learn about our families and what assets they bring and to support them, we need to know the responses to these questions. Because once we know a family's responses, we stop blaming and we start partnering. And while there's no one way to conduct these interviews, we do recommend that a family has more than one child at the school site, that the interview is done with all the teachers at the same time, so it avoids the family having to share the information in multiple times. The last piece is to really start to build trust before you do the interview. Maybe you've done a few cohort meetings or you've reached out in other ways to check in with the family and build some relationship. And while there are questions in there that are about background, we also want to be careful about not asking any questions related to documentation status or citizenship. You're going to find this strategy right up in the resources that we're going to share after the webinar. And at this point, I am really excited and happy to hand the mic over to my colega, Adriana Diaz, and thank her for starting us off on the bilingual identities portion.
Buenas tardes, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Our next section is really around celebrating and connecting bilingualism through sharing experiences and personal stories. As you can see, it says counter story, because this is about elevating the stories that have been marginalized for so long. We're going to cover two different strategies. They both align with principle number 1 of the EL roadmap around culturally sustaining and affirming pedagogy and practices. So both of these strategies focus on promoting bilingual identities. This becomes important because institutionally, there is a clear history of structural and systemic policies working to eradicate languages other than English. Prop 227 in 1998 almost obliterated bilingual programs. I'm sure you remember having to have parents sign off for them to be a part of our programs. And for almost 20 years, many of us saw the effects until once again, after some huge concerted efforts, the pendulum swung back, and in 2016, we finally saw the end of Prop 227 with the passing of Prop 58. This, along with the EL roadmap, the Global California 2030, all becoming doctrine for our state. We now have educators trying to build counter stories of linguistic capital, educational access, and once again, making clear the connection between language to identity and culture. We are also amplifying socio-cultural competence, which is about equity and social justice. That is a part of the work that we are doing. This is the third pillar of dual language and really is the pillar the other two rest on. And we will talk more about that in a little bit. So the first strategy is a bilingual poem that families can create for their children. It's an opportunity for families to own and embrace their bilingual journey and the journey that their children will take along with them. We really see it as almost a language love letter. It's a proclamation that bilingualism is the goal and they are proud of their children for embracing multiple languages. Once back in the classroom, this could also make a beautiful display, and we've also seen it produced as a beautiful book. And the strategy is inspired and based on the poem titled Bilingual by Alma Florada, and I'm going to read the Spanish side for you. So it says, porque hablo español, puedo escuchar los cuentos de abuelita y decir familia, madre, amor. Porque hablo inglés, puedo aprender de mi maestra y decir I love school. Porque soy bilingüe, puedo leer libros, ebooks, tengo amigos y friends, disfruto canciones y songs, juegos y games, y me divierto el doble. Y algún día, porque hablo dos idiomas, podré hacer doble esfuerzo para ayudar al doble de personas, y lo haré todo el doble de bien. We're in love with this poem, and so for far too long, our Latino families have felt like having their children lose their language is just one more of a long list of sacrifices that have had to be made in order for their children to succeed in this country. Every bit of research and the growing of more bilingual programs lets families know that language loss no longer has to be one of those sacrifices. We want to help families connect to their own bilingual stories, whether they are already bilingual or are monolingual Spanish or monolingual English. They have chosen a dual immersion program for their children, and therefore we want them to connect to their why of bilingualism and to the power and importance of their children becoming bilingual and biliterate. So based on the Alma Florada poem, we created 3 templates that can be used with your families. The first is for bilingual families, so they can complete it in both languages, so it's in both. The second is for monolingual Spanish families to fill out. And the third is for monolingual English families to fill out. With all 3, it is the idea of valuing bilingualism. The templates' added beauty is that they are able to infuse it with things that are connected to their family, that are important to them. And so in having every family create their own bilingual poem, it gives everyone a common goal of bilingualism. Even more for our Spanish-speaking families, it's an opportunity to not just take back their language, but to elevate it, which is so important. Again, all of these templates will be shared with you at the end of our presentation today. So the next strategy is around the idea of testimonios, which I'm sure many of you have heard of or have used yourself. Here we have a couple of definitions about what a testimonio is. They come from Jose Medina, who has done some amazing workshops around testimonios and has written a book also around his own testimonios. You can read the full definitions, but I just wanted to point out some of the main wording. The idea that it is a witness account. It's also set against the backdrop of social inequality, so it's speaking up to those things. It is a first-person account, so it is your perspective, your own vision from this. It is also, it also questions institutional power, and that's a powerful thing. And it speaks for justice, so every individual's justice. And finally, it's keys to building inequitable social frameworks. And that's also really, really important. So I'm sure many of you add an intro letter as you start the beginning of your school year. Maybe your picture is on the website for your school, giving a little bit of information about you. This is a good start, but the purpose of this testimonio is really to start the process of building relationship with your students and families. It's an opportunity to let families get to know more of who you are and why you chose to be a heroic dual language teacher in the first place. We have 4 prompts to help you start, but of course these are your testimonios, and you can add whatever you feel is important for you or what you want to be able to emphasize as a way to model these testimonials. So first I want to be able to go through the 4 ways that we have talked about them. The first is the idea of connecting with families. So share your background and your family history. Again, this is around whatever you're comfortable sharing. Tell your language counter story or your connection to why you are a dual language teacher. Explain why you chose to become a dual language teacher. And then finally, share your hopes and your dreams for your students and your families. Again, as a way of just being able to connect the information to your families and start to build those relationships. So as a way to model a testimonio and the different ways that it can be used, I will be sharing my own testimonio. So hang in with me for a little bit. You're going to get to know more about me than you wanted to. So this is my own bilingual language story. So my full name is Adriana Citlali Martinez Morales Diaz. Martinez is from my father, Morales is from my mother, and Diaz is from the guy that I married. I also wanted to point out that my first name, Adriana, is actually Latin, and it means lover of the sea. And my middle name is Mayan, and Citlali was a Mayan princess, which meant princess of the stars. My name was really intentionally given because my parents, knowing that I was a brown kid and I would face some challenges in this country, wanted me to be proud of all the parts that make up who I am. I am mestiza, is what I would be told. And I have been told since I was a baby that I have a place in this world, and I have a place from the deepest ocean, Adriana, to the highest stars, Citlali. I will also say my parents were hippie 70s guys, so it explains a little bit of how all that came to be. It was all deep and meaningful. And yes, of course, these two amazing little people here are my parents, cuties that they are. I wanted to share with you my language story and how it began long before I was born. So a little bit more background about me. I am Cubana on my mom's side. I am Salvadoreña on my dad's side. And I was also born in Mexico. So growing up, my parents used to say I was the best of the United Nations rolled into one. Spanish is my first language. I came to the US when I was 6, having done kinder in El Salvador, and because there was no dual immersion programs at the time, I entered into English-only classrooms where I learned immediately that my language, my culture, and who I was not really welcomed. I was called Citlali my entire life, but then on the first day of school, although I tried to explain that I went by my middle name, the teacher made it really clear that I would now be called Adriana only, mainly because Citlali isn't the easiest thing to say. I have always said that even at 6 years old, I could feel that I was an inconvenience, that I was a problem that she somehow now had to figure out how to deal with. So also told, couple of years into the school, I was told by the principal during recess, who overheard my friends and I speaking in Spanish, that we were not allowed to speak Spanish and we would get in trouble the next time that she heard us. So on going home and telling my lovely little parents, they immediately the following morning showed up at the school and demanded a meeting with the principal, which ended at the end of this long meeting with the principal apologizing to me and letting me know that I could speak Spanish whenever I wanted. My parents used that experience and that time as a moment to teach me the power of speaking up and not allowing anyone, even a person of authority, to diminish who I was. The impact of that moment was huge on me and would guide and sustain me through all of my years of schooling and any challenges that came up later on, especially throughout my career. I can say that school was never a place where I felt my culture or language was welcome, or a place where I saw myself reflected in the books that we read, in the posters on the walls, or in the curriculum that was taught. However, I had parents who made sure that my identity and culture were central to our life, and they did not disappear. It was inherent in me always. The reason being, because these seeds of pride and resistance were planted long before even my parents. So I'd like to share a little bit of that part of the story. So that cute little girl in the middle is my mother at the age of 8 in Cuba. The piece of paper on each side is this little tiny square piece of paper that my mom has shown us since we were little kids. And she's always said that it's one of her most prized possessions. So the story really begins that when my grandmother moved from Cuba to New York, the one request made by her mother was that her children could not lose their Spanish. They connected their language to their culture and their very identity. As the first family member to immigrate to the US, my grandmother was entering uncharted territory, but understood that her language needed to remain a priority. On the day my mom was born, my great-grandmother, on hearing the news, ripped off this little page from the almanac and wrote one note on the back that said, let's see how you teach her both languages, Spanish and English. My great-grandmother's fear was that she would not be able to communicate with her own grandchildren. In the case of my mom, her father passed away suddenly when she was 3, and my grandmother returned to Cuba, and my mother and her brother were able to communicate with all the family, thanks to the promise kept. So the picture on the left are my grandparents when they first headed over to US, to New York, the cold weather coming from tropical Cuba. And of course, those are my parents. The picture on the right are my grandparents on my father's side, and I would like to share a little bit of their language story. So my grandparents immigrated to the Mission District in San Francisco from El Salvador. My grandfather came over first and worked several jobs day and night for 6 months to save enough money and find a place to bring my grandmother and their 4 children at the time. He instantly experienced discrimination because of his brown skin and because he didn't speak English. He would say that he thought the Americans were going to be more helpful, but instead learned very quickly that it was the other Latinos who were struggling just as much, and together they created their own community of support. He then returned home to bring his family over, and my father has told this story for years, that on the day they arrived to San Francisco and moved into their little apartment, the first thing my grandfather did was sit his children down and make it clear to them that in their home, speaking Spanish was mandatory. Now, he had already gone through some discrimination, and you would think his response would be, we gotta learn English, but something in him told him, you've gotta keep your Spanish. He made it clear that they would not lose their home language, and although they would learn English, inevitably, that it would not be at the expense of their first language. He told them their language encompassed their culture, and they all should be proud of it no matter what they faced in this country. This from a man who started working from as far back as he could even remember to support his family, who never attended formal schooling, and didn't even learn to read until he was 17, when he went to high school on his own to try to get a better paying job. So I know how blessed I am to have had these 3 examples to guide me and my family, and that these are far from the norm. We know that for many of our students and families, this is not the foundation that they have, for many different reasons, for different fears, a lot of them very valid reasons. So as teachers, we can help not just our students, but their families to see the value and beauty in dual immersion programs and embracing who they are, language and all. It is because of the sacrifices and roots put down by my antepasados that I was blessed to grow up with my language and a really strong sense of identity of who I was and am. I was then, of course, it was so important to me to, of course, pass this on to my children. So the last picture for you is my lovely little family. This is Diego, he is 17 and he's starting his senior year. This is Anais, she is 18 and she will be starting college next week. And finally, this is my lovely husband, Andrew. So I am proud to say that my children are truly bilingual, in some ways even more than myself. So even though Spanish is my first language, I am a product of an English-only educational system. So although Spanish is my first language, I learned to read and write in Spanish because I learned how to do it in English. So I might not be the first person you want to contact for translation, but you can contact my kids. Whereas my children went to River Glen Dual Immersion in San Jose from kinder through 8th grade. They had dedicated teachers who saw them and made them feel worthy and happy to be learning 2 languages, and continued that Spanish education through their high school with different AP classes because of their bilingual education. They are truly bilingual and biliterate in every way. They can read, they can write, they can speak equally in both, and can move in between both cultures in the ways that they needed to. The other thing is that they are pretty unapologetically proud of who they are. And finally, the cherry on top is that if you ask them, they will say that their children will absolutely have to speak Spanish. So to my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents, the promise made all those years ago will continue. So there's my little story. I want to end with this quote that is also by Jose Medina, which I think is just really powerful. And it says, as dual language learners, we may find it difficult to serve as guerreras, guerreros, if we are not willing to bare our souls and share of ourselves fully. So we want to create inclusive classrooms that embrace students and their families to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. Through sharing of our own stories first, you are also creating opportunities for every student to share their experience, starting with their families. It's about sharing your truth, your perspective, and through this, parents also owning their bilingual journey for themselves and their children, and also having a little bit of bravery for themselves. It also opens spaces to continue this work for the rest of the year. In a future webinar that we're going to be doing, we'll be talking about the other ways that testimonials can be used. The other thing that I want to make clear is that there is no formula for the perfect testimonio. It's simply about speaking from the heart and speaking your truth. And that's what's most important for us and for us to be able to pass on to our children, our students, and their families. So we're going to put you into some breakout rooms just to give you a little bit of time to process all of my stuff and think in terms of a couple of different things around the things that we've already shared with you and some of the strategies that we've already talked about. And so you will be put in rooms for about 15 minutes. We are going to also put these prompts into the chat for you to be able to kind of see them as we go. And so I'm going to read through them. So the first one that we'd like you to discuss is a feeling I experienced. So how did this connect to your heart? How does this inspire your inner guerrera or guerrero? An idea you have from this. How can you use these testimonios as a way to connect to your families? And finally, an action I will take. So what can you share of your testimonios? And how will you pass this on to your families as a way to help with that relationship building? So you will have a countdown that lets you know when you're going to be pulled back from the breakout rooms. We hope you have some rich conversations during that time. If you need to, take a minute to stretch also, and we will see you back here in about 15 minutes. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some rich conversations and got some inspiration from each other. So we're going to move on to our next section. In our next section, we'll be talking about creating dual language advocates in our families. So this is important because I'm sure we have all heard the negative reactions to dual immersion programs. I myself heard it from friends around the fact that it would confuse them and why are you putting them into this program? Especially for my daughter, she was born really premature. She was born at 29 weeks. And so her ex-doctor, I emphasize the ex, told me that she did not recommend putting her into a dual immersion program, that it was too much for her to handle. And of course, I knew my family would kill me. And so of course, she went into a dual immersion program and of course did amazingly. So combining these kind of long-standing misconceptions and shifting the conversation to what we know are the benefits of dual immersion requires the recruitment of other guerreros and guerreras to spread this truth for us and help us with that. So we have two main goals around helping families in this area. The first is understanding and articulating the learning process their children will be engaged in. It's important that families understand the program model and how that works on a daily basis, especially with our current situation. They really need to know the intentionality that your schools are taking to be able to stay with fidelity to your language model and to those needs. So as a part of this is figuring out ways to ease their fears, reminding them that this is the best place for their children's learning and their language development. Finally, being able to offer tools that families could use at home to support their children's growth and learning, that idea of that co-teacher. By sharing this information, families can have greater understanding of the process for dual immersion, what it takes, and therefore keeping everyone focused on the long-term goal of the programs and the benefits of bilingualism. The byproduct of this idea of disseminating information to the families is that you will also have some really strong advocates come out of this. Parents can be, families can be some of the biggest proponents of wanting this to be the case and passing that information on. We just need to really be sure to give them all the information in the first place, to take it in, to understand it, to see it in action. So to help with this, it's important to continue to build their understanding around what research says and continue to build that buy-in. Armed with the latest information, families will become great champions at your schools and for your programs. Through this concerted effort, together as a school community, the collective, you can then combat inequality in all areas. So this goes past language into race and gender and all those other fun ones. Now, more than ever, with dual immersion, as it is experiencing this growth, yet it's still in a fragile growth area. We need accurate research-based information available to families and our colleagues. So to help with this, we have several family resources that we want to share with you. Once again, all of these will be shared with you after the presentation. So the first is about the 3 pillars of dual language education. These are important because they answer the why of dual language programs. This can be helpful to families to see the many benefits of dual language programs, especially that these programs are the only real additive model where home language and bilingualism is fostered and developed daily. The infographic that we have for you, which is just a flyer with the information that you can pass on to your families, is in both languages, of course, and it includes a description, a greater description of each of those pillars. The next one that we have is an informational handout around supporting bilingualism in your dual immersion, and it's 2 parts. So on the we have them on both languages, and the idea is just very quick ways of supporting bilingualism at home. And so it's quick things that families are able to do at home with their kids to promote what's going on in the classrooms, of course, and can be incorporated. This next resource is really about debunking some of those most common myths around bilingual development and offering the research to prove why they are false statements. This can be beneficial for families, but to also help their other family and their other community members to see the benefits of bilingualism. So when they're being told, why are you putting your child in this program, that they've got real research behind that to be able to combat those questions. This comes from a site called the Hola blog. It offers bilingual language development resources from a bilingual speech language pathologist. So they know what they're talking about. The next one, we know that the most important thing we can ask families to do is to engage in rich, intentional conversations with their children on a daily basis. We know that building strong oral language around speaking and listening skills is a crucial foundation for the participation in school, for developing reading and writing proficiency, and for their academic success. So here we offer some simple ways that families can incorporate more talk into their daily routines, hopefully without making them too stressful, incorporating it as a part of their daily routines. Okay, so next we wanted to show you one of our videos, one of our SEAL videos, and these are created for the sole purpose of contributing to the field and making them available to everyone. Several have a focus around the importance of family partnership and buy-in, and they can all be found on SEAL's YouTube page. You would just have to type in SEAL and then Sobrato. If you just type in SEAL, you're gonna get cute little animals. SEAL Sobrato would take you to these resources. We would like to share one of them with you today that you can share with your families, and it is called Call to Action. So we're gonna play that for you. So we're gonna work on getting the audio up for you guys.
Where California has really caught up with what the research tells us about language development and bilingualism and its, and the state has actually embraced.
We will work through technical difficulties. Hang in with us.
Caught up with what the research tells us about language development and bilingualism and its huge benefits, and the state has actually embraced bilingualism as a direction.
Our state leader is asking us all to join.
Today, I am proposing that all of our K-12 students, parents, and educators travel on the road to a multilingual California, a global California 2030.
We're at this really exciting, important moment in history where California has really caught up with what the research tells us about language development and bilingualism and its huge benefits, and the state has actually embraced bilingualism as a direction.
Our state leader is asking us all to join the movement of bilingualism, biliteracy, celebrating who we are, celebrating the gifts we bring.
Our language, our culture is our identity. And so education should be more than just about academics. It should be more about also how to be a human being and compassionate towards others.
It's a different era now. California voters passed something called Proposition 58, which said we want more programs in our schools that'll lead to biliteracy, and we want our schools to gear up to offer more programs.
So think of all the powerful knowledge you have. All of those things are happening in your brains as you are translating. Isn't that amazing? That's powerful stuff.
We know that throughout time, a tool of oppression has been separating parents from their children. So it is that critical that we really think about what are we doing in school to bring families and school together.
That is the goal of our of bilingual education, is to allow a marginalized community to the opportunity to move up.
It's essential that parents know that you have a right to request the language program you want. You have a right to say to your school district and to your school, I want my child to be learning bilingually. I want them to be in a dual language or bilingual program. That's a legal right as well as a human right.
The future of California is built on multilingualism.
If we implement those programs nationwide, then, I think we will see a different United States.
Quedó muy lindo. Gracias, gracias, gracias.
So the call to action video is really meant to inspire and engage family partners as dual language advocates. And so again, please feel free to use those as you see fit. We want to also just give you a minute on thinking in terms of one or two ways that you can see yourself using these different resources and the video. Again, there's also other videos available on the website that we've shared, as well as others that maybe you already have as resources at your site. Just thinking in terms of giving you about a minute to just jot down a couple of ideas of how you can see them working and where you can specifically see where you can incorporate them. And so we're going to give you about a minute, and then I'm going to pass it on to my amazing colleague, Jen, to take us into the final section. So we'll give you about a minute.
right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm checking your comments. I really appreciate your thoughts and ideas about how you might be able to use those. And I would like to just take a brief minute to thank you, Adriana, for your really powerful story. Of course, we've practiced this and I've heard it, but every time it just really speaks to our hearts. And I just want to thank you for sharing that with all of these wonderful folks. And I want to also encourage all of you teachers out there to really give it a try and think about using a testimonial, if even a brief one, to let your families in on your counter story or your story. So let's move though into this last area. It's developing family partners, it's families as learning partners. This is for your consideration, this last action area. And in this one, we're going to really lean into those ideas in principle number 1 of the EL roadmap, the one part that says there is no one size fits all. And that dual immersion and distance learning really needs to be responsive to the present conditions, but also to the English learner students and their families and their varying degrees of proficiency, their needs, but also their capacities and their assets. So this section is filled with practical ideas to answer your family's questions and to build a really deep partnership that is a co-teaching relationship. All right. The main purpose for attending to this area is that we need to develop family and caregiver capacity to support learning. Most families do not have a teaching credential, and like me, they might have been raised prior to Common Core. And let's remind ourselves that even in families where the family members do have teaching credentials and are actually teaching, that we have a dual relationship, and it's not always so easy to be the parent, the family member, and the teacher at the same time. It can be pretty complicated, actually, how I experienced it anyway. But if we can develop those partners in learning, both the caregiver and the child experience will be better. There will be less tears, less refusal, less stress, and less frustration. We can give our partners some straightforward guidance in clear, non-lingo educationese that helps them really know what is a priority in the learning tasks and what is not. This is, though, a radical shift for us. In the past, families partnered with us in different ways. Perhaps it was by supervising reading or homework in the evenings. We're now, though, in an entirely different construct, which really says that families and caregivers are integral and equal partners for the success of distance learning. And additionally, of course, we know that there's a huge range of support and time that caregivers and families will be able to offer. In the past, we didn't need to make visible the learning and the learning process in the same way that we do now. We have to be open about the process so that they can support it. And of course, we're going to do this in the preferred language and in the preferred method of communication. We can't underestimate the translations, good translations for parents, and we will also remember to elevate Spanish. If a document, for example, is bilingual, Spanish should go first and left to right. We need to be flexible with our timing for communication, which also means we need the support of our district and site leaders. The action of developing partners in learning is the needs to know section of the cohort agenda. But we can still use these ideas and strategies even if, and hopefully still find them useful, even if you don't have a cohort meeting. So let's just dive in and take a look. So how many of you use an inquiry chart to start a unit? I can't see all of you, but I'm going to imagine that many of you are raising your hands. You ask students to purposely build prior knowledge about what they already know about a topic and what they want to know about a topic to hook them in with joy and with wonder and excitement for a unit. Well, need to knows for families work similarly. What do my families need to know in order to be able to access and support student learning? What do they already know and I don't need to waste my time repeating? What assets are they bringing? Who knows? You might have a hidden techie in your group. Asking what do my families want to know about our learning activities and what needs they have is really important, because maybe there's an area that we take for granted, but it's something that they're either curious about or maybe frustrated or wondering. So just like an inquiry chart for children, you can prompt and make suggestions because you know that they're going to need to know your learning management system. You know that they're going to need to know Zoom. And maybe you'll need them to know like a number for tech assistance. However, we don't want to make assumptions, of course, about what families have and what assets they bring to the table. So we want to create the conditions by which they can freely share both their needs and their resources. So however you end up gathering this information, whether it's with an inquiry chart or some other way, it's of course up to you. But a well-designed system, regularly revisited with easy scaffolds or early scaffolds, will help you out in the long run. Once you know what parents need to know, you can use a weekly welcome and organizational message, schedules, and print lists, which are really packets, as ways to deliver the information. These suggestions are the how you get the know across. They should be easy to understand and follow along to help motivate and encourage engagement. We give this information in all forms: electronic, paper in hand, via text, a school app. You know all the ways you've been communicating with families. And everything is bilingual. We love the idea of a welcome video that reinforces your belonging and partnership messages. We can make these fun and celebratory. Another hallmark of consistent and easy to read welcomes, schedules, and print lists is a repeated visual marker like the light bulb to help families specifically think about what you want them to focus on or not focus on in a particular lesson or unit. So let's take a look at each of these ideas a little closer. So this is a welcome to the week cover page and title, and there is a video that's in this example, and it does a few things. First of all, the cover page positions Spanish purposefully at the top, and it has only the most important information: what week it is, sometimes that's hard to know during COVID, and the title of the materials. Second, it uses the school logo, shout out to the Mustangs, not just any image or clip art, because it connects them to that sense of belonging. And finally, this one has a QR code, which is so very easy to create front and center. And this QR code in particular has a link to an edited brief version of a welcome message. The sample for you is in Spanish in this video, and it's purposely not scaffolded or intended for children. It's just a quick welcome for families. And if you do one in Spanish, we'll also do one in English, or you can do it bilingually. So we're gonna go ahead and click on the screen, and the image of the QR code is now gonna come up. So go ahead and take out your phone, open it up, turn it to the camera. No, we're not taking a selfie. I mean, we could, but maybe I should do it that way. And hover your camera over the QR code. As you hover, a link will appear near the top of your phone. Tap it and you can watch the video. And it's about 40 seconds long, so we'll give you just a minute to go ahead and do that. Now remember, some families, of course, won't have smartphones, so you're going to provide the link to the welcome video in a variety of ways. Here we go. So we're not playing it because hopefully you're able to play it on your own phone. And we'll give you just about 15 to 20 more seconds to take a look. So, of course, these are not meant to be really great, cinematographic works of art. They're quick and brief. And yeah, it's okay to make a mistake instead of re-recording. You can record them bilingually or have two really quick videos. But the idea is that the cover page arrives in the mail, hopefully, or electronically to your families. And right when they open it up, there's an easy to access and use link, which of course, again, we're going to cross-post to our learning management system because not everybody has a smartphone. Notice in that edited clip that you saw in the welcome video, the teacher builds excitement, she connects to a learning task, she reminds parent that more is coming in the cohort meeting. If you had a full version of the welcome message, she would also thank families for their engagement in the previous week. It might feel like this quick video is an additional little piece of work, but remember the things that we do now will help build that partner and learning capacity, so hopefully down the road, they get more familiar with the rhythms of what's expected and what's to come. All right, I love schedules. There's nothing to me that beats a really great schedule. And the weekly schedule that you include and comes home in the print list is actually a lifesaver for families. Providing a paper copy makes it readable in one page because you know those Chromebooks we hand out to families, it's not always easy to see the full information and it can be frustrating. So that's another point about access and equity, which is of course a principle and a component of the EL roadmap. So notice in this corner example, there are clearly organized times and directions to synchronous, asynchronous, and independent work. But we don't have to say synchronous in the schedule. I mean, I can barely say it right now. So consider using really straightforward language. And again, let's draw your attention to that light bulb. Remember that image was also in the agenda? Here it is again, right? Cluing families into the need to knows, what to and what not to focus in the lesson. For example, I hope that you can see it, in the reading aloud asynchronous portion, families are clued into focusing on the ideas in the sentences the children are producing, not on the spelling. And another item that's really critical to developing our partners in learning are those print lists, which will have the welcome message and the weekly schedule inside of it. Print lists are the learning materials that go home in packets to students with the schedule and the welcome and the welcome message. We know that our youngest learners need pencils, pens, crayons, and paper in hand to be able to do the work. And many districts have figured out very quickly over spring how to send these packets or print lists by the central office to home. Hopefully your school or grade level or district is facilitating that process for you. But what we want to highlight here is not how the materials arrive to students, but what kind of materials arrive. So print lists are a really great way to organize and sort out work. It can give scaffolds and structures for students. And of course, sure, some of the pages might be worksheets, but the majority are open prompts, graphic organizers, even blank pages with invitations to draw. We're of course not going to assume that families have blank paper, lined paper, or that they're going to be printing out materials. For your kinder learners, you might send sentence frames or story images from a narrative that they can cut out, reorder, and retell. And of course, you'll want to send your phonics items. As a parent, yeah, even as a principal parent, I can tell you that getting these materials weekly in the mail was a huge relief. It reduced fighting. It meant that I didn't have to force my kids to type as an additional barrier to thinking and creating. And also because those print lists were generated by grade level, the collaboration meant many hands made short work. So let's take a look at some examples of a print list. And you're going to have this shared with you at the end of the webinar. So this is from a first grade print list from last spring. This is a partner in learning page. This first one you see on the screen that says Ciencias. It's got, it reinforces the schedule, and it's got small images down on the bottom that are included as scaffolds to use with the lesson. Then we'll take a click and look at the next one. This second one is what we use for our vocabulary studies. It's known as a vocabulary in context, which is always, of course, in context to the content. Language learning, of course, happens in and through content thematically. And this final one I like to include, it's a prompt just for drawing, but what's extra great about it is it's got the date up in the corner, which is an additional clue to parents, especially busy parents like me who are sometimes running staff meetings, that this particular item was supposed to be done on this particular day. So what to and what not to focus on is an area that we identified with this little light bulb. And we used it multiple times because it can contain just a brief but a little bit of guidance for parents about what to and what not to focus on. And this is a really critical piece to developing this partner in learning. This is where you're going to let them in on some of those behind the classroom door secrets. Last spring, families and caregivers were spending an exorbitant amount of time on the details that we as educators would purposely ignore. Because they lean into what or how they learned as children, families were focusing on aspects of lessons that weren't central. For example, correcting the spelling in every word and having kids rewrite it in the sentence in the first grade, instead of focusing on the main idea of expressing opinion. Perhaps they sat painstakingly at the screen with a kinder helping them hunt and pet to write out a sequence response to a story. Many, many tears later, the cursor blinks still on the screen and everyone is crying. Ask me how I know. We developed the what to and not to focus on by necessity last spring. We sorted it by grade level and gave information to parents in the positive. Focus on the synchronous meetings and oral language, or turn in an assignment as is, I'll correct it if needed. These little bits of advice you can give to families and caregivers will really help them calm down and create a more joyful experience. So it wouldn't be an ELRISE session without a little think, pair, share. Although don't worry, you're on mute and no one's watching. You can talk to a stuffy, a water bottle, or even to your hand if you want to. But let's just think for a minute about what you would like to tell families what to focus on and what not to focus on. So within those first few weeks, especially, what would you encourage families to do and what should they let go? So first, let's give ourselves some thinking time, and then we'll use that frame to answer. So I'm going to read the frame and then I'll let us think. I would tell families to focus on and not to focus on So we'll give ourselves a little bit of thinking time. And go ahead and answer the prompt into the screen. Again, you're on mute, so it's okay. Talk to your hand. All right, great. So I would tell parents, for example, to focus on their child repeating out loud with me and not to worry about negatively correcting pronunciation. Or I might tell parents to let their child focus on the oral language that's happening in the room and not to worry about if they're fidgeting in front of the camera or moving around too much. You know, as an act of human kindness and self-care, you might want to think, or we might want to think about this sentence frame for ourselves too. What would we like to focus on and what are we going to let go with this first return to school? You know, some first and thens. So we've reached close to near the end, and I want to thank you all so much for engaging with us as we consider these action possibilities. We know that you have so much on your plate and that your effort and participation is really appreciated. I also know that you're going to do your very best to welcome families, and as a former kinder parent, I thank you for helping me stay focused. I'm proud and curious about the magic that you're going to create. So let's take a moment and think about, you know, you got a lot of strategies presented at you in this time, and I hope though that in that stream there were a few ideas that stood out. So we're going to take a moment now to just think about our own little call to action. Time to reflect and process some of the learning that we've shared here together today. So I'm going to walk you through a little strategy to think about what you want to commit to trying, what's your very first step, and who you might need help from. So go ahead and find a piece of paper or a scrap note or something that you can write it down, or you can open your phone on the notes section. And go ahead with me and please, let's write a number 1. Next to that number 1, list one idea from the strategies you would like to try. Maybe you have 2 ideas and that's okay. An example might be number 1, share my testimonio. So go ahead and write your number 1, please, and we'll give you some time. Great. Now write a number 2 on the page, please. And next to that number, write what your first step would be toward making that strategy or idea happen. An example to follow along might be number 2, gather a few photos. So please take a moment now and write your number 2. What's your first step towards that strategy? And I see that some folks are writing their numbers in the chat, and that's wonderful. I really enjoy seeing your sharing. All right, and a number 3, who or what can help you with this strategy? Is it somebody from your grade level, your department, your school site, or somebody completely out of there? Perhaps it's your colegas or your directora or someone else. So following in that example, my number 3 might be, I need to contact my grandmother for photos. Go ahead and write your number 3. Who or what can help you with this strategy? I see lots of folks thinking about a testimonio. Sure is powerful. So here's one more last full sample. One idea that I would like to try is setting up family cohort meetings. To do so, my first step is to gather parent contact information and send a survey. I might need help from our school admin assistant or from IT. I'm not really sure which is the best way to survey families in our district. So whatever you try, please remember, you're not alone in this work, and we're together now, literally, of course, but we're also together in a community of bilingual educators. We know how hard it is, and we know how much passion and care you put into making it the very best environment for your students and for their families. So it's hard to believe we've reached the end, but we have. In fact, we're even going to be able to let everyone go just a little bit early, but not quite yet. I do have a few announcements to make about some upcoming webinars, and I'd like to invite you to consider your thoughts about this webinar and to share them in the chat. We take your feedback seriously, and we'd love to hear what you think and what you want some more of. But we do have a couple of things already planned. Part 2 of this seminar, or this series, designed especially for K1 dual immersion teachers, will be aired next Wednesday, August 26th, from 2:30 to 4:30. And the focus on that session is really on your learners, the students, and the specific strategies around building biliteracy within this early first month of school. We're going to be talking schedules again, but in more detail, language allocation, designated ELD, and much, much more. Then we will repeat session 1 and session 2 of this K1 dual immersion session coming up further along in early September. In September, we're also going to have sessions in October on social and emotional learning and distance learning for English learners. These sessions will be for any instructional setting, whether it's dual language or an English only. So I see some comments starting to pop up in the chat, and I would really like to thank you so much for engaging with us and for sharing your feedback. We'll keep that open for a little while. We'll play some music so that you can continue to add your thoughts. Be brave. You can do this. We're proud of you, and we're so thankful to be in partnership with you. So once again, muchas gracias a todos, que le vaya bien, and best wishes.